on the 23rd of May, 1941, exactly 40 years ago, and at this very time of night, we were standing at action stations on the bridge of the battleship Prince of Wales, waiting and watching for something which we expected to see at any moment. It was very cold in that bleak half-light of that latitude in the North Atlantic. The wind was screaming through the halyards to the foremast just behind us. The battle ensigns ironed out flat in the gale. We must soon be in action now, so there was plenty to think about. So we just stood waiting in silence. Even our bridge comedian was gagged. Through the opening into the compass platform, I could see the captain and the navigating officer, hands thrust deep into duffel coat pockets, dark silhouettes gazing forward over that vast expanse of inhospitable sea flecked with 1,000,000 white horses. We were battling into an awkward nor'wester, in company with the Hood, about a quarter of a mile away on our port beam, the green rollers breaking clean over her bows up to her forward gun turrets. And we were on a course which it was calculated would converge eventually on the new German battleship Bismarck. That's what we were waiting for. That's what we were watching for. The Bismarck, rumored to be the most powerful fighting ship ever built. To make matters more dangerous, we'd lost our destroyer escort. They'd had such a terrible battering in the last 24 hours, being often completely obliterated in green seas, that they'd been forced to reduce speed, and they were already out of sight astern somewhere. So there we were, two plums of the home fleet, Hood, the pride of the Navy, and the Prince of Wales, the newest battleship, forging into the Atlantic without an escort. Almost without precedent, that, and extremely dangerous, for such ships could be very vulnerable to submarine attack without destroyer protection. But that was the situation, so we had to lump it. For myself, it was hard to believe it was all really happening. It must just be another piece of acting. But I was, in fact, waiting to do my job, which was flank marking for the Hood by radio on her first falls of shot when we started shooting at this Bismarck. A very daunting prospect indeed. So it wasn't acting, it was the real thing. Just a year before, I had been acting in a play called The Peaceful Inn at the Duke of York's Theatre in London. I think we were the only theatre open at the time, for London was nervous. And when the news is bad, people don't go to the theatre. And the news was very bad indeed. The Germans were only 200 miles away. They'd overrun the lowlands, and they were already swarming into France. And if they got to Calais, they'd only be 20 miles away from Dover. There was an actor in the cast who'd just got himself a commission, the RNVR. And one night in the wings he said to me, "Now promise me, Ezzy, you will never act again until we've driven these Nazis out of Europe, for if we don't do something about it, there'll be nothing left for any of us." So I applied and managed to get a commission too. Well, there followed a period of training in HMS King Alfred in the public baths building at Hove. And then instruction in squad drill, navigation, signals, flags and Morse, naval history, aircraft identification and so on. How to anchor a battleship. And in 5 weeks I'd learnt another part. I was supposed to have learned how to be a naval officer. At least that was the object of the exercise. Then I was sent on a course in high-angle gunnery to Devonport, and then on another one in low-angle gunnery to Whale Island in Portsmouth. And there I met George, and we learned that we'd both been posted to the same ship, the Prince of Wales, then building in Camel Laird's yards at Birkenhead. "Oh dear," said a classmate, "a battle wagon, how very dull. You won't get anything more interesting to do in a ship like that than convoy duty. You ought to have got into something exciting like destroyers or MTBs like me." There's no place so forlorn as a shipyard in winter, and Camel Laird's was no exception. Well, we eventually went aboard and started to get acquainted with the ship's company and the mysterious running of a battleship. However, we finally made the journey from Birkenhead round Cape Wrath and the Pentland Firth into Rosyth. They finally finished with us, and there we were, sailing under the Forth Bridge and up to Scapa Flow to do our working up in the North Sea. Speed trials, gun trials, damage control exercises. so as to make the ship ready for any eventuality. And then the captain was addressing the ship's company on the quarterdeck, telling us that he'd been to see the Commander-in-Chief and told him that he considered the Prince of Wales was ready to take her place in the home fleet as a fighting ship. A picture had appeared in the press with the caption, HMS Prince of Wales, Britain's new unsinkable battleship. Well, that was a great comfort to one and all. Well, soon after that, on a very fine May morning, I went ashore with George to do a bit of bird watching on Flotter, one of the islands surrounding Scapa Flow. Apart from a wonderful variety of waders, sea birds and flowers to enjoy, there's something mystical and timeless about those islands. I remember a peregrine flew overhead, the paragon of birds. It reminded me of good days spent flying hawks on Salisbury Plain in peacetime. As I say, looking towards those brown hills, it was a haven of peace. Nothing to be heard but the distant calling of redshank away on the mud. But look towards the flow, and there was the dark armada of the home fleet. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, minesweepers, their masts and foretops like a forest, fading almost into infinity up the water. A massive array of fighting ships designed for action and for war. But now, utterly stilled, not a movement, not a sound. Like sleeping ships in a painted lagoon. Sitting ducks, aren't they, said George. And we both laughed. Well, when we got back to the ship, we were told we were under 2 hours' notice, and the ship was being made ready for sea. Great activity everywhere. Oh, action so soon. What was up? Where were we going? Rumours were already buzzing through the ship, as they always are, and this is where the lower deck lawyers really come into their own. We're going on a Russian convoy, you know. Well, actually, we're going over to the States. Well, if you must know, I'll tell you we're going down to the Cape, and I got that from my mate, the Master-at-Arms. Well, we should soon see. By tea time, everything was lashed down, stowed away, the guns were cleared away for action, and we were ready. And we were soon moving down the flow, in company, the Hood, the Prince of Wales, and a large escort of destroyers. And by the time we were gliding through the boom defences into the North Sea, the first pale stars were glimmering in a violet sky. Well, it was time to go up and relieve George from his watch in the air defence position. So up I went, and he told me what was really cooking. Earlier that day, there'd been a signal from a reconnaissance aircraft that Bismarck, in company with a Hipper-class cruiser and a large escort of destroyers and supply ships, had been spotted going into Bergen Harbour. Oh, yes, I said. Oh, really, yes. Oh, well, we're on our way to stop them coming out, said George with his comical smile. So that was why we'd been ordered out in such haste. Before midnight, we altered course to the northwest, because there'd been another signal to say that the Bismarck had left Bergen Harbour and was on her way to the Denmark Straits to the north of Iceland, with the very probable intention of getting into the Atlantic and shooting up our convoys. So it was desperately important that somebody should go and stop her doing that. By dawn the next day, the weather had deteriorated, and we were butting into a rough sea with rain squalls, with the white horses literally leaping right over our poor destroyer escort, making very heavy weather indeed. Later that day, mountaintops were sighted on the starboard bow, and our bridge comedian, all parts of ships have a comedian, he started to sing, "In Greenland's icy mountains, to Afric's sunny shores." Oh, shut up. Anyway, it's Iceland, you nit. By this time, it was known that the Norfolk and Suffolk, two old county-class cruisers who'd been patrolling in the Denmark Straits, had spotted the Bismarck with their escort, now identified as the Prince Eugen, a powerful 8-inch cruiser. They were practically through the Straits and making their way into the Atlantic. So by the time we'd rounded the southwest tip of Iceland and steering north, we were racing towards each other at a combined speed of about 60 miles an hour. On the afternoon of May the 23rd, visibility was so bad that there was actually a possibility of passing the enemy without seeing them. But we were still many miles apart, and as we were not yet at action stations, of course, and I'd finished my spell of watchkeeping, I thought I'd go below and try to get a bit of sleep. I lay down on my bed, but the vibration in the ship was so great with her exertions in that awkward sea that sleep was impossible. So I picked up a little Temple Shakespeare I'd had at the Old Vic years before, a copy of Henry V. I plucked some comfort from those well-known passages and saw that the feelings of men before a battle were just the same more than 500 years before. Then the voice of the captain over the ship's tannoy saying they expected that we should be at action stations at 9:30 that evening, and all those off watch must go to the cinema flat and join anti-flash gear. So along I went to this part of ship normally reserved for entertainment. We'd been watching a Bing Crosby film only a few nights before, and I drew these rather sinister garments, long gauntlet gloves and hoods with neck pieces, presumably designed to protect one from burns, should you be careless enough to get too near a cordite fire or an exploding 15-inch shell. However, I then went back to my cabin and began to prepare for battle. Part of an old custom, this. I undressed completely, washed myself down from head to foot, and then got dressed in clean clothes all the way through. The idea being that if a fragment of shell should happen to burst into your guts or your chest or the side of your face, it wouldn't take any infected material with it. Anyway, that was the idea. I finished dressing, so I sat in my chair, sleeping fitfully, to be rudely awakened by that strident, never-to-be-forgotten sound of a bugle sounding off action stations. The dreadful note of preparation. I fell out of my chair, snatched up my Zeiss field glasses, my life belt, tin hat, anything else, anything. Yes, went back, pulled down the pictures and photographs off the cabin walls and a few things off my desk, and wrapped them up in a blanket and stuffed them under the pillow on my bed. For when the main armament of the ship goes off, the shock that runs through the whole fabric of the ship is so great that anything fragile will be shattered to pieces. On the bridge, it was a scene of good-natured activity, laughing and joking, testing telephone communications, and a snatch of song from our bridge comedian. And we'll all get promotion this side of the ocean when we've sunk the old Bismarck and all... Oh, shut up. And then George, suddenly pointing over the side. Look, Ezzy, look! There is one! I swung round, expecting to see a German battleship or a periscope at least. And there she was, a great northern diver, a beautiful bird we've often talked about, hoped we might see if we ever got up into these waters. And there she was, bobbing about in the sea, only 50 yards away, looking round serenely and surveying this blustering display by man. Well, we stood to action stations for a long time, but nothing happened. And then a brief stand easy was called, and cups of very welcome hot cocoa were handed round. One of the ship's boys, sitting at his post as a lookout, slumped forward, his cup falling and breaking on the deck below, only to jerk awake again, immediately looking round anxiously. And then at last, the voice of the captain on the ship's tannoy, saying that he expected that we should sight the enemy within a quarter of an hour. He wished us good luck and good shooting, and told us to do our stuff. Oh boy, here we go, this is it. Nasty moment, that. And then the voice of the ship's chaplain, beseeching God's protection, God's blessing, asking him to preserve us in the battle to come. Well, I hope God hears that, said George. And then, funny how one's thoughts go, I thought, what is today? May the 24th. I picked up the telephone, which connected to our forward director tower, and shouted into it, Air defense position here, it's Empire Day. Ah, what? Repeat, can't hear. It's Empire Day. Then the first lieutenant had another idea. He pulled out that lookout boy from his post. Somebody put a bridge coat on him, gave him a pair of binoculars, and told him to get up into the high top on the foremast, keep a lookout to the north, and sing out if he saw anything. Just like Nelson's day, isn't it? Said our comedian. So we went back to our places, scanning that horizon. Now absolutely dead clear clear after rain, a broad band of yellow-green light right across the horizon ahead of us. And then at last we heard it, that tiny voice just audible above the yelling of the wind. "Enemy in sight!" We swung round and looked up to the high top, and there was this diminutive figure pointing to the north. "Enemy in sight," it repeated. We swung back. "Nothing in sight yet, nothing. Come. God's sake, come." And then, at last, the tops of two masts slowly pushed themselves above the horizon, and more of them came into sight, bridges, funnels, until slowly, arrogantly, these two ships revealed themselves in full, in stark clarity, two clear-cut shapes, dark and sinister, on that clear horizon. "Target Green 80!" shouted the lookouts. The director towers swiveled round, and the main armaments swung round and trained on the enemy. "My God, she's colossal," said George. "She must be over 50,000 tons. And there she was at last. Bismarck, the mystery ship about whom we'd spoken so much, but about whom so little was known. There she was, gigantic. Nobody knew what her true displacement was. Nobody knew what her potential might be. We were not to be kept in doubt for very long. Now, as we drew closer, all eyes turned towards the hood, waiting for the signal which would give order for the plan which had been arranged. As soon as Bismarck was sighted, Hood and Prince of Wales were to part company and engage her from either side, thus forcing her to divide up her armament. But the signal was never made. The Admiral in Hood had evidently changed his mind. He was urging the ships forward. "Close the range, close the range." And on we went, closer and closer. Then as I watched her through my field glasses, I saw the Hood fire her first salvo. Forward guns cocked up at an acute angle, a brilliant flash of orange light, and a jet of black smoke shooting 100 feet up into the air. Then almost immediately we fired our first salvo. Now the effect of 6 14-inch guns going off simultaneously is shattering. That ear-blistering, cracking roar, that huge explosion of flame from the guns which seems to burst right back into the bridge, followed by the pall of black cordite smoke which seems to envelop one completely. My tin hat was wrenched off in the blast and went spinning into the air and over the side. But then soon the smoke was cleared and the vision ahead was absolutely clear. Nothing from Bismarck yet. She was still sailing majestically across the horizon. Then I just timed to observe the Hood's first fall of shot, slightly short and to the right. And then I saw those brilliant orange flashes right across the side of the Bismarck, which meant she just fired her first broadside. And this is a nasty moment, because you don't know whether those shells are directed at you or the other fellow. But somewhere under that grey ceiling of cloud, those shells were hurtling towards us in the great arc described by the plunging salvos fired at that range. And then we heard it, that sound like the approach of a hurricane, as the shells came nearer. And then that first broadside from Bismarck, falling practically vertically, plunged into the sea just short of Hood, sending up those vast towering columns of foam like huge phantoms which collapse and fall and disappear into the sea. My God, that's a bit too close for comfort, isn't it? On we go. Nearer, nearer, range closing. Then comes the sound again. A hit on the Hood, a brilliant flash, and the dull thud across the water of the shell burst. And then a huge cordite fire bursts into flame, great reaching flames and black smoke coiling round the mainmast and drifting out astern like a black train. Oh, God, that's nasty. They'll have a job to put that fire out. Then the Hood fires another salvo, quite unaffected by what's going on behind the bridge. They probably didn't even know. And then the Admiral made his last signal, which was for both ships to turn to port so as to allow the afterguns to bear on the enemy. And as we were in that turn, here came the sound just once more. Boom! And then the unbelievable happened. A vast explosion explosion erupted in the hood, like a monstrous livid blossom opening up almost in slow motion, sending a column of bright yellow smoke towering to the sky hundreds of feet, and great lumps of burning metal flying in all directions, and one piece larger than the others, which could have been the hood's famous spotting bridge, went twisting into the air like a leaf caught in the central blast of an autumn fire. The hood had been blown apart like a child's firework. The forward part tilted up at an acute angle, the bows clean out of the water, was already beginning to sink. And as she did so, incredibly, as if in salute to her own funeral, she fired a last salvo vertically into thin air. And then those two parts of the ship, canted up at opposite angles, slid beneath the surface of that boiling sea. And there was nothing left. She'd vanished. There was nothing, only a few smoking remains. My God, the hood! The hood's gone! It was unbelievable. It was appalling. And then we were already plunging through a few remnants of hood still floating in the sea, and I turned to George feeling utterly sick. And in that moment we staggered under the weight of a gigantic cascade of ice-cold water as a shell from Bismarck, falling very near the ship, swamped the whole bridge in solid seawater. And then I was dreaming. I was dreaming that I was listening to the band in Regent's Park. And then as sense slowly came pulsing back, I was conscious of a sort of stinging sensation in my face and in my chest, and a heavy weight lying on top of me and all round, an unpleasant, warm liquid swilling about my face. And then the deck below leapt up and hit me hard on the cheekbone as a heavy explosion rocked the ship somewhere. And then I remembered. Oh yes, I'm on the bridge of the Prince of Wales in the middle of a battle. And this heavy weight on top of me must be a pile of dead men. So I let out a kind of a groan, and somebody pulled me up by the boots. I staggered to my feet, looking round stupidly, trying to understand what had happened. I was told later that the Bismarck, having disposed of the hood, turned her devastating firepower onto us, and a 15-inch shell had come right through the bridge, killing nearly everybody, except the captain, navigating officer George, and a few others. "I think you better get below to the sick bay, old boy," said George. I looked round towards him to say something, but I couldn't see him. I couldn't see anything at all. But I finally fumbled down those ladders that I knew so well, and eventually found myself in the sick bay. "Hello," said the PMO. "Oh dear, what have you been up to?" he said. They'd cut the anti-flash gear off me, and I was soon lying in one of the sick bay cots, under the heavy atmosphere of anesthetic and disinfectant, and listening to the sick bay attendants going about their business, for there was suddenly a great deal to do. There had been many casualties and dead men to be prepared for burial at sea. Soon I fell into a morphia-induced sleep, and in that sleep came dreams of horror. I dreamt there had been a huge explosion in the sick bay. The ship had been blown apart and the sea came gushing in, that I was dying, and then I was sinking into the black obscurity of the deep Atlantic. Then I woke as my cot was violently shaken as we got off another salvo. So it was still going on out there. Oh Lord, far away, a different world. Then voices came in and told us what was going on outside, what was happening up on the bridge, in that world of dancing light and vivid action, while down here in the sick bay, it was muffled darkness, different world, remote from it all. Then the voices told us that the Bismarck, having inflicted great damage on us, had broken off the action and had disappeared into snow squalls. And then we heard how aircraft from Victorious had flown overhead on their way to seek out and find the enemy, how Churchill had issued an order, "Sink the Bismarck," after he'd heard that the hood herself had been sunk. how every ship within striking distance had been ordered to leave what she was doing and join in the hunt. Then we heard the Prince of Wales had broken off the chase, had turned about and going back to Iceland. We were running out of oil. Then the gentle voice of the PMO. He was leaning over my cot, saying, "Afraid you'll have to lose that left eye, old chap." "Oh, well, what about the right one? Can you see anything out of it?" Well, no, actually I can't." "Oh, well, the eye man in Reykjavik will look after you." And then we heard how all the big guns of the home fleet were beginning to close in on the Bismarck. She had been mortally crippled by a torpedo fired from a swordfish which had blasted away her rudders, and she was out of control. And we were in the cold, still waters of Valfjordur in Iceland. And then somebody burst into the sick bay, shouting, "The Bismarck has been sunk!" Wild cheering greeted that announcement. Then George came in to tell me that the Bismarck had gone down with her flag flying, but they'd been unable to sink her by shell fire, so the Dorsetshire was sent in to deliver the coup de grace with torpedoes fired at very close range. So that was the end. It was a heroic finish to one of the great tragedies of the sea. Toll for the brave. In the hood, there were 3 survivors out of a ship's company of over 1,000. In the Bismarck, just over 100 men saved out of a ship's company of over 2,000. And all those shipmates of mine injured and killed in the Prince of Wales. So Churchill's order had been carried out. An eye for an eye. All those men dead in the terrible intensity of a major battle at sea. But the fearful pity of it all.
The Death of the Hood, based on his personal memories, was devised and presented by Esmond Knight. The programme was produced by Helen Fry.